Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today I have with me George McCrea. George is the Chief of Staff at the headquarters Royal Engineers Geographic. And George is on this program today to talk about the role of geospatial in the military, and more specifically, a term I absolutely love: geospatial data soldiers in the military. I have my geeky sort of boyhood fantasy, sort of like what runs wild with what that could mean in the trenches, and people like looking at coordinates and finding where to where the battle should go, with soldiers in the trenches. But I'm sure as we talk to George, we'll find a little bit more about that. So, George, welcome along to the show.
Jason, great to be with you. Thanks very much for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be joining you and try and explain more about my how my childhood dreams of being in the military sort of transposed into that boy in the trenches with data to being where I am now.
Yeah, cool. Well, it sounds like maybe my sort of terrible explanation there wasn't too far off. So let's start a bit about you, if we can, George. A little bit about you, your background, and how you've ended up as the Chief of Staff for your organisation.
Sure. So I've been in the military now for almost 16 years, and after Sandhurst, which was a year long, I joined the Royal Engineers, a corps whose history traces back some 300 years now, and the Royal Engineers have got a very proud history, either cognizant or not, in data. And really my specialism in the Corps, which is now a geospatial specialist, which I've done for the second half of my career, again, was that you can trace that back to 1750 or 1747, when Roy was conducting his surveys of Scotland after the Jacobite Rebellion. That was in many ways data capture, because it was land surveying, data capturing, creating maps, generating maps. That's still what we do today, but it's just updated for the 21st century. So I never realized that I was a data specialist when I started off in my military career. And it was one of those things that I had a shuddering realization of, actually, this is something that I need to wake myself up about and get on board with and do, because you could see the way that the military was changing. So after about 7 years, I studied for a master's in geospatial intelligence, which led me to the second part of my career, which is where I've been focused on geospatial jobs. And within that, data is our bread and butter. So when someone says geospatial, they're saying geospatial data, whether they realize it or not.
Right.
And I've had 3 different jobs in that role. One of them was as an advisor in a NATO headquarters. So being that interlocutor, or the Babel fish, as Lisa Allen described it to me a few weeks ago, between the deep data specialists who are doing the really high-end data analytics and the staff function of a headquarters, so where the more generalist people are sitting, and you're that interlocutor between them. So that was a really enjoyable role. I then did subunit command, so I was in a leadership role for 2 years, and that covered the time when we were in the COVID pandemic. And it was really interesting to see how we could really harness the power of geospatial data, working with luminaries such as Ming Tang from NHS and other organizations, to harness this power of a multitude of spatially related data and provide decision support to some really quite senior leaders. And it was briefed into the Prime Minister and things on a daily or every other daily business. And then my role now as Chief of Staff is I'm in the capability headquarters, so that directorate that sits above our capability, in order to help plan for the now, for the future, and then beyond the horizon, because we have a capability of some 650 people dotted all around the world, and we're there to ensure that they're enabled to do their job on a daily basis and provide that visualization of the operating environment, the analysis of the operating environment, and that link back to other geospatial intelligence functions back here in Cambridgeshire.
Right. And maybe a very novice question for me, but when we say, which bit of the, I'm going to say army, the military, is it the army, is this the navy, which part of, or is it a sort of span across everything?
So the latter bit is true. So again, minor history lesson, I'll get it wrong. But so the Royal Engineers motto is Ubique. Sorry to any Latin scholars for pronouncing it wrong. And that means everywhere.
Right.
And our capability is ubiquitous across the military. So whilst we're in the army and we join the army, we have people supporting the Navy because they work with the Carrier Strike Group and the Royal Marines. We have people supporting the RAF in various geospatial intelligence functions. And then as well as having a huge amount of our workforce in the army, we have a huge amount in United Kingdom Strategic Command, which is an organisation which will be familiar without being familiar to many people, because it's where our sister organisation, the National Centre for Geospatial Intelligence, sits, and other organisations as well. So we are across many organisations as well as being deep in both the army and UK Stratcom.
Fascinating stuff. What do you guys do then? So I know obviously you talked about the history and back to the 1700s. I assume that's not when you started, by the way, but when it started.
Yeah, I think some of my colleagues probably did that. If you look at the state of them,
they handed over to you gracefully. But but that you talked about it being about data collection. But is that the sort of the extent of it? What is it broader than that? So what's the kind of remit? What do you guys do on a sort of day-to-day and strategically?
Yeah, I think we're quite lucky as a capability that we have. If you look at that T-shaped individual or T-shaped capability, we've got really, really broad spectrum of capabilities, and we're quite deep in a lot of them as well. Okay. So we will do the collection, we'll do the curation, we'll do the collation, we'll do the management, we'll do the analysis, we'll do the visualization. So there's a phrase that's used, from Whitehall to warrior, and what we're trying to do is provide data to those individuals in Whitehall who need to make decisions, but the same data, or maybe enriching the data down that chain of command to the warrior who you mentioned, at the very start, in the trenches. Right. But along that, it will be this constant cycle of creating more data or collecting more data. And we do that in a multitude of ways. So we do airfield surveys. So that's collection and creation of data. But then you've got to make a decision from that, i.e., can you land or take off from that? So it's the analysis of that. We created data, and one of the examples, although it's a couple of years now, but for the Nightingale hospitals that were so synonymous with the COVID pandemic. Well, the siting of those was finally decided on by, I think, Sir Simon Stevens in the NHS, working with Ming and her team in the NHS and Sir Simon. We had geospatial analysts generating what we refer to as multi-criteria analysis. So here's lots of different data. Here's what the end user, the customer, wants. So we want it to be within 10 minutes of an existing hospital. It needs to be at least 100 square meters with the capacity to hold 500 beds. Can you visualize that for me? Yes, we can. Okay. Right. Can you then go out and do more in-depth studies? Yes, we can create forms in order that people can go out and generate more data. So all this data that we had, we augmented it with supplementary data in order that the decision could be made. Now, the initial remit, I think, was for 13 Gale hospitals, but through the harnessing of the power of the spatial data along with the analysis, we were able to refine that down and actually present the answer back to Sir Simon Stevens, saying you can achieve the effect you want with 8 Nightingale hospitals. Right. So, saving the public purse money from the cost of building them, but also the workforce. We knew the NHS was stretched. Yeah. They couldn't necessarily provide or crew or 13, but they could probably do 8. Yeah. And similarly, ventilators, they could probably do 8, not 13. So I'm not saying that without geospatial data, it wouldn't have happened, but what we did, we maybe expedited the decision that we've come to. And it was part harnessing data that already existed, augmenting it from creating data, and then bringing in data from external organisations such as the NHS, Public Health England, police forces, fire brigades, all these things. So it's that whole data journey. Yeah,
it's interesting actually. You often that there's a delineation in organisations between collection and then getting and using in terms of value anyway. But you sort of tell the picture, talk through the picture of that being almost part of the same remit. Like the fact we need to collect it and the fact we need to use it is essentially one and the same thing.
Yeah, and that's what sets us apart, I think, in terms of one of the taglines that we have. We are the military's deployable geospatial specialists. Okay. So the deployable element is really key, and it's why we are in uniformed service, because otherwise we'd pay a consultancy to go and do it. But some of the places we go, a consultancy would not necessarily want to go. And it's for that basic data collection or the ability to do basic data collection. So the head of our capability, Colonel Paul Hammett, a few years ago, he was in Iraq, and he helped set up the Iraqi geodetic coordinate grid system, because that was going to be vital in order that Iraq could then generate its own base mapping. Something that we think is, just there and happens. And the Ordnance Survey, we go onto the Ordnance Survey and we've got loads of maps. Well, unless you've got a geodetic coordinate system, you can't do that. So that was good at the very, very start of a geospatial data journey. It's creating that geodetic grid system in an environment.
And that's even before collection. That's almost, I feel like that's the framework by which you can start to collect and then map, rather than, that's almost pre-collection. So really interesting. And I think the value of being able to kind of collect and then use, I think you can accelerate, you remove essentially some bottlenecks in the process. And we often talk about actually the need to think about how you're going to use data when you think about collecting it. And often those two things are actually separate. Someone builds an application for data entry and operations, and then someone goes, we need to do some analytics or some reporting from it. And it's not been set up in the way that's really maximizes that opportunity. So bringing these things together is really fascinating. So are you, so I kind of get the sort of the remit there in that sort of end to end, the full value chain of data. What's the kind of like reach of that, I suppose, sort of the scope of it? You talked about hospitals there, and are there other examples? Is this just about reacting to those sorts of events, or is this that's less military and more running the country? So that's kind of quite a broad scope, right? So where are there boundaries? Is it kind of anything and everything, or is it quite refined in terms of the terms of reference, I guess?
Yeah, it's anything and everything, really. And we are not really constrained. A lot of what we do is we'll hear something or pick something up on the grapevine of this is happening, and we'll realize that there's a spatial construct to it. So in the past year and a half, one of the teams in 42 Engineer Regiment, they've supported, sadly, the passing of Her Majesty the Queen. So they provided spatial support to the delivery of the funeral and all the other events around that. The Commonwealth Games, the G7 Summit, COP26 in Glasgow. They will most likely provide support when it's decided for whether it's Liverpool or Glasgow that hosts the Eurovision Song Contest. I don't mind which. I'm just hoping you can get a ticket. So those events, anything that has some sort of national symbolism, we're likely to be involved in. We're not going to be the primus inter pares, the one leading the way, but we'll be providing support in the background.
Input, some advice, some guidance on some data points that help with the planning and the decision making.
Exactly that. Yeah, and it's quite often supporting the military elements that are supporting that. So it's the way that the military provides support around the country is laid down, and what we're doing is trying to provide the military people support within that. But also we always have contingency plans in place. So we know winter time is I was going to sort of start, winter is coming. We know winter is coming. So, there's always the risk of flooding and associated climatic events. Well, we will have things prepared in readiness in order to support the local resilience forums. So that, the combination of the police, the fire brigade, environment agencies. So drawing in data, whether it's through APIs or whether it's through people actually furnishing us with the data, in order that we can provide, quite often it's a dashboard, a common operating picture, situational awareness. In order, it's that key thing about providing situational awareness.
Yeah.
And thinking about what's happening in America at the moment with Hurricane Ian, although we're not supporting that, we do have teams ready to provide humanitarian and disaster relief to the Caribbean. Right. So if the hurricanes hit the Caribbean again, like they did a few years ago, quite bad, then we will be there to support in a geospatial construct. Now, that isn't just, here's a map, get off the ship, go and find the place. But, you've got change detection, change analysis, which you can use drones, UAVs in order to fly over, so remotely sensed imagery, doing open source data capture in terms of people are firing off a tweet, you've got the XYZ coordinate of the tweet. Now, we're not spying on people, it's out there and it's data that we can ingest in order to help them going forward. So there's, a huge spectrum of things that we get ourselves involved in, but
Mm.
also in terms of the hierarchy of the organisations we'll support from top to bottom. I mentioned in the COVID-19 pandemic, we were supporting with situational awareness, directing to number 10 Downing Street in the Cabinet Office, but also we were providing support down at the lowest level to troops on the ground who were counting people in and counting people out of the mass testing sites in Liverpool. So it's really that huge spectrum of opportunity where we can see there's a spatial element that will support it or will help it. And then there's there's the normal support, should we say, the more traditional support to the military, which is how are we going to maneuver this armored formation, so lots of tanks and armored vehicles from point A to point B. We'll do some terrain analysis in order to find the best route appropriate. But in the last 18 months, 2 years, we've seen a mass of both product and business model innovation, and we've sort of tried to pivot quickly to keep up with that as we've generated that in order to support these more wider tasks that people wouldn't necessarily find the military supporting all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so very broad. I think you anything and everything. I think that kind of that hook on anything that's of national interest, I think, sort of makes it quite clear. And then clearly the slightly more sensitive military side of supporting military operations, but that breadth is huge. But that strikes me then that there's quite a broad, I suppose, stakeholder group around you. That those sounds like those demands, those requests can come into you from lots of different places, government bodies, I'm assuming, commercial organizations even, and the police, the health service, all these different stakeholders around you. What's the breadth of that? It feels like that's very broad, and I imagine quite impactful in terms of the work that generates.
Yeah, definitely. And as I mentioned, the organisation above where I work, so I'm in headquarters Royal Engineers Geographic, which is for the deployable element, but our headquarters organisation is the National Centre for Geospatial Intelligence, and it's really important to understand that it's that national element of it.
Right.
So we will support, we're there to support the military primarily, but that doesn't mean that we won't support other people. So we provide support across government, across all government organisations, and then have through public sector agreements support or bilateral relationships with organisations like the Ordnance Survey, with Map Action, who we will help or they will help us, and all these other people. And the stakeholders, I'm not sure I could sit down and print off a stakeholder matrix at the moment, because it's constantly growing. And there's also that element of the way that disruption and digital innovation and digital transformation and data transformation is going. It's vital that we look to engage more with the commercial sector, I think, and through things like this, through your podcast and through other organisations, so that we can go out there and understand what the commercial sector is doing from a geospatial point of view, because that's all from even just from a wider data point of view, because we aren't necessarily the leaders in everything that we do. We might be really, really good at some things, but we need to improve in other areas. And similarly, there might be organisations out there who are the leaders where we need to improve. So working with those organisations, and that's where we're really lucky in my organisation, that we have a reserve soldier component. So not everyone is a regular soldier or officer. We can actually have people who are reservist soldiers and officers come and bring their expertise into our fold, and we can jointly exploit that. So there's a junior soldier in our reservist squadron who actually has a PhD in AI and ML. And so whilst in the military, he's the lowest rank, probably in the wider defence, he's probably one of the key leaders in AI and ML. And he just bamboozles everyone because he comes in and is like, that's great. I've got no idea what you said, but I understand that it's really, really important. We should harness that power more. Yeah. So there's, it's that multifaceted approach to stakeholders. We're not concentrating on B2B or B2C. It's all that different spectrum of opportunities really that we can try and get involved in.
The how about the commercial sector organizations that are doing maps? Let me summarize it like that. You've got Google mapping the
Yeah.
world. You've got some TomTom who provide maps into apps like Uber. And that this might be a very novice question, and the level of detail in those might be hugely different. And I think compared to what you have, certainly not related to military, but some of these other more national conversations that you talked about, are they seen as a threat? Are they partners of yours? Are they good kind of competition in a way that sort of forces you to get better at maps? Because you do see people switching to commercial bodies when they can get a better return or a better response or a better quality. So how do you sit alongside some of those organizations?
Yeah, I wouldn't see them as a threat. I think it provides us that opportunity for us to up our game where we need to, or
Yeah.
learn from them. And I
Right.
think we're in that lucky situation where they would not see us as a threat or a competitor in many ways, because our customer base, to use the phrase, is entirely
Very different.
different.
Yeah.
We know who we are providing our support or who our customer or consumer is, but generally it's internal to government. So I think that bilateral arrangement, or that ability to work together or learn from each other, I think is really, really important. And where there are organizations that can go out and generate income and therefore be maybe different in their innovation cycle and their value stream, we can learn from that and pick up some of their learnings. And similarly, where we can go to places that they can't go to, either physically or conceptually, they can learn from us in that regard.
Yeah.
So whilst there's no formal relationship between us and Uber, or us and Waze, or us and Google Maps or Apple Maps or whoever it may be, there's a lot that we can learn from there. And in fact, the Ordnance Survey, who do have a public sector agreement, we have a really good working relationship with. And in fact, the Ordnance Survey used to be part of the Royal Engineers many moons ago. And then, so they are the little brother, shall we say. Hopefully David Henderson's not listening, or he'll probably shout at me. But that's an organization who we can learn a lot from as well, because they're working in a different, in many respects, unclassified environment.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of working relationships with them in terms of, I mentioned the Commonwealth Games. We worked really closely with the Ordnance Survey and things that we're trying to provide support for the Ordnance Games, for the Commonwealth Games. It doesn't mean it's super secret and we can't talk about it. It just was, they had some parts of the capability, we had other parts of the capability, and there was already that public sector agreement in place in order that we could work together and draw that forward. So I think it would be naive of us to see companies as a threat, and would go against this idea of the open innovation model that seems to be gaining more and more influence in many organizations going forward.
But as you say, that collaboration between your stakeholders with other organizations is really important. And I guess, the better the world gets at this stuff, geospatial data and what falls off the back of that increases levels up the game in terms of skills and capability, both ways. So into the military and from the military out into the sort of private sector, which must be a good thing overall.
Yeah, definitely. And there is a phrase that I'm banding around at the moment, which is the unconscious geographer. So people are always quite concerned, like in work, we'll sit down and be like, okay, here's your web map service, which is served over a dashboard, and blah, blah, blah. We'll talk dolphin at them, as they say.
Yeah.
And they'll go, I just want a hard copy map. It's like, well, no, we're 21st century. Here's your bit on the computer. And they'll be a bit worried about that. Yeah, they'll step out of uniform, they'll go home and they'll turn on the TomTom, type in the address, or they'll turn on their iPhone, or they'll use the Ordnance Survey app. So it's the same thing. So it's putting it in the context. Yeah. And it's a phrase that you've used many times and things as well. It's about the culture. The science will or won't work. That's predetermined by physics and maths and things. So it's almost irrelevant having the discussion about that. It's the discussion about culture and what people are happy with and what you can get people to understand. And this idea of the unconscious geographer is, we need to awaken them to understand that they are already doing it. It's not something to be scared of. And you could knock off geographer and put unconscious data expert, scientist, analyst, whatever it may be, because in many ways, everyone is already doing part of it. They just need to be aware of it, that they're doing it.
Yeah.
And then, because that enables them to do the, should we say, the easier elements of it. And then they can be a more intelligent customer or consumer and go, okay, I've done a range ring, which has given me a buffer of 50 kilometers for whatever reason. I want you to now do X, Y, or Z on top of that. So they're actually thinking about the question and coming back to you with a better question that can enable you to go into more depth analysis of the data, of the options, in order to feed back to them better answers.
It's interesting. I had a sort of similar conversation with an industry peer of mine a couple of weeks back about kind of the level of data literacy people need, and their argument was, well, actually, if we give really good tools to people, their data literacy doesn't need to be great. And the example they gave was Waze or any mapping thing. What we've done is gone, I want to go from A to B. I need to make a decision how I'm going to do that. Before, you talk to your father-in-law or whoever, and they tell you all the different routes at the M4 and the M40 and all the rest of it to get there, and that's their experience. And you get the map out and you'd look and you'd map your route. You'd make a decision about how you got there, and it'd be quite hard because you don't know the roads. Now we just say, I want to go there, and not only does it say how to get there, it gives you some options. So it's taken away the kind of need to be map literate, I suppose, in that sense, or data literate in that sense, and it's given us the answer. So it's kind of a question about, well, is that possible across all things, all decisions, or actually is it only relevant for some relatively straightforward decision making sets of decisions, or is it only relevant for some people? So I guess you're actually, with that sort of map example, there's some things that's quite straightforward to do, and there's some things like the terrain through a piece of Iraq that you haven't been to before might be something slightly different.
Yeah, definitely. But it's really interesting, that example you used in terms of ways other apps are available. It's as you say, you'll go from point A to point B and it'll give you a number of routes. But how do you then choose that route? And I think that's possibly down to then your level of, let's say, for want of a better phrase, data literacy, because each of the routes will be defined by a different set of algorithmic outcomes, which is based upon the data.
Yeah.
True. So if you don't understand it, and also in many ways, if you take the answer as being the answer without being able to interrogate it, so is it set to fastest route, shortest route? Is there a bridge in the way, or is there not a bridge in the way, and you're driving a double-decker bus? So there's then that second order question that you need to then possibly go back and ask. Well, the initial answer is really easy and doesn't need a huge amount of data or spatial literacy. Being able to interrogate it and understand why you've got the answer, that's where the real interest, I think, in terms of data literacy and the data savviness comes along. And
it comes back to context. Comes back to context, as we talked about before. I think the kind of last sort of area would be great to explore with you is just sort of your team and how they're made up and the skills. And you've mentioned quite a few different types of personas as we've been going through this, but how's your team made up? Not necessarily your team, but just the geospatial data soldiers, as we talked about at the start. What are their skills? What are their backgrounds? What training, education do they get? Like, how do you create these great people in your organization?
Yeah, and I think the way that you define it then is, how do you create them? I think that's a really insightful part of the question, because it's unlike many organizations that have data within them, we don't recruit data specialists.
Right.
We recruit people who have the capability to be data specialists. So, as I said, my career, I didn't start out as a geospatial data specialist. I did 7 years of charging around various parts of the UK and Germany in heavy metal, which was great fun, doing armoured engineering.
Oh, nice.
And then I realised that there was this change afoot. Similarly, the soldiers who will join the army, they will join the army because they want to join the army. They'll then be offered a series of options. Here is all the trades that you could do, because we've done some various testing, and you have the skills and aptitude to do this, or this.
Right.
Here's a bit about each of those trades. And then the soldiers will go and do what we refer to as their Class 2 training, which is about a year-long course, and then go and do some experiential learning as part of a team. They'll then go away and do their Class 1 course. And at the end of the Class 1 course, they'll come out with a bachelor's degree, which I'm not sure of any organisation which trains everybody to at least a bachelor's degree. Yeah, and that means they can then go off and practice their art or science, and that's, I think, another discussion: is it art, is it science, by themselves, because we've given them 2 years in the school training. Let's say they've got a couple of years of experiential training, so they're trained to go and execute their skills by themselves. And I think that makes us unique. You know, we're recruiting aptitude. We're not recruiting LinkedIn badges, and so that's what we're always looking for. We're really lucky in that respect, that we can then not necessarily mold people to what we want, but we've got the people that we want, and we're just then giving them the tools to go out and execute.
Sorry, George, is I sort of worry almost about the pace of that. So brilliant, absolutely fantastic, brilliant skills for life for you and for the individual. But you know, that's 2 years of training and 2 years of of sort of putting it into practice. You know, that's a long old time. Does that all the brilliant, loads of positives, but does that inhibit pace? Is it just that you've got enough people coming through that sort of all people are always popping out the other side, and therefore you've got this constant kind of stream of great people becoming productive?
Yeah, exactly that. And I would imagine, again, we're dissimilar to many organizations who you've spoken to and worked with, in that we are a bottom-fed organization. So we are a conveyor belt, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. You cannot do sideways entry to it. You've got to start at the bottom. You've got to do your time training at it's the Royal School of Military Survey, where you do your basic training. Then you'll go away and you'll go and join, most likely, Royal Engineers Regiment Geographic. And there you'll spend a bit of time. You'll go out on exercise. You might deploy on operations. You might support things happening in the UK. So after a year and a half, you're probably practicing your trade, but you're doing it as part of a team.
Yeah.
You then take all that experience. You then go back and do your Class 1 course. But all of this is factored into our workforce plan. So in your first 8 years of service, you are likely to spend 2 years doing your training. And that's accepted, because we realize that is vital in order that we can then push people through the pipeline, that they can get to the rank or the experience that we really need when they need to be out operating by themselves. And I mentioned the Nightingale Hospital example. That was a young soldier, chap called, was at the time Corporal Sam Adamson, been in the army 7 or 8 years.
Right.
He was there, and he was the one briefing Sir Simon Stevens, going, here is the map that has the answers on it for you, or the graphical user interface, I can't remember which it was, or the portal he created. You know, that was a young soldier who we'd given the skills on, we'd empowered him and said, you go away and do what we know you can do. And he absolutely knocked the whatevers off of that.
Yeah. And you it's amazing. And you can do that because they've had the right level of training and put that into practice. And you therefore know you can trust that they have the skills to then do that job, and not micromanage the hell out of it from there. So incredible. So I think that is, as you say, that is unique, that sort of bottom up, that commitment to someone's development that benefits them and the organization, so that you have the right skills, definitely is unique. And I'm sure there's lots of people can learn from that, play the long game a little bit more, which is fascinating.
And it's that element as well of constantly investing in our people. We know we've got to be realistic. Everyone will leave the military at some stage, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't invest in them at the point at which they're in it. And it goes back to the Richard Branson quote of train your people well enough so they can leave, treat them well enough so that they want to stay. And there's always a balance to be had. And whilst I mentioned the Class 2 and the Class 1 course and the bachelor's degree, there's lots of other training that we do. Like, we'll have people who'll go away and do master's degrees separate to the one that I've done, because we've identified a knowledge gap. So some people away to do data science masters, or geodetic survey masters, or AI masters, all these things. And that's adding to their personal skill set. But the idea is they come back in and they federate that knowledge around the organization. And then there's the lower level things, like we've created the team have created a coding club, because we realized that there was lots of good ideas happening around the place. So why don't we just bring all that together with all the Python and the R and the C++ people who are really good at this. They're self-taught, but why don't we harness the power of that self-taught knowledge and look to use it in a way that is going to benefit them and also us as an organization as a whole.
Yeah.
And we've reaped the rewards. I mean, one of the processes we used to run, it'd be very mandrolic and would take about 6 hours. It's now been automated because they've gone, right, here's what the standard set of products are, and it's now 20 minutes and a few clicks of a button. So time is one of the commodities that we can base our value on. It's one of the few, because we don't have a bottom line. So by saving time, you're enabling senior leaders to make decisions which, you know, could be life or death if you take it to the conclusion quicker, which then is getting inside what we call the OODA loop, which is observe, orientate, decide, act. If you can make your action cycle quicker than the competitors, let's say, if you're in business, or the enemy in my business, then you're likely to be onto a winner.
Yeah. Amazing, brilliant stuff. It's fascinating to talk to you about this. As I said, my boyhood sort of fantasies talking about military and where this could go is pinging, and I could talk to you for hours on it. But we'll draw it to a close for now. And thank you so much, George, for sharing that. As I say, fascinating stuff. Lots of stuff in there that I'm sure people will be interested in, but also get value from in terms of what they're trying to achieve, particularly around growing skills and the commitment of individuals. I think that's awesome. So appreciate your time. Thank you, George.
Well, no, it's been an absolute pleasure, Jason. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. And thanks everyone for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'll catch you again soon.